The Valorian warships blocked out the sun over Earth's colonies. They came without warning, without mercy, and without any intention of negotiating. In less than 10 years, the Valorian Empire had swallowed 17 star systems whole. Their soldiers were twice the size of humans. Their technology was centuries ahead. And their queen was known across the galaxy as the destroyer of worlds. When they reached the borders of human space, the United Terran Council held an emergency meeting that lasted 3 days. Military commanders presented battle simulations. Every single one ended in total human defeat. The Valorians were simply too powerful, too advanced, and too numerous. Fighting them would mean the extinction of the human race, so they chose a different path. They chose to beg. A delegation of 12 diplomats was sent to the Valorian homeworld. Their ship was small and carried no weapons. It passed through the massive Valorian fleet like a tiny fish swimming between whales. The humans aboard that ship knew they might never return home. But they also knew that the survival of their entire species depended on what happened next. The Valorian throne room was built to intimidate. The ceiling stretched so high that clouds formed near the top. The walls were made of black stone that seemed to absorb all light. And at the far end of the room, sitting on a throne carved from the bones of conquered kings, was Queen Zyrith. She was beautiful in a terrifying way. Her skin was silver and smooth, catching the dim light like polished metal. She had 4 eyes, 2 where human eyes would be, and 2 more on her forehead. They were all the color of fresh blood. Her body was tall and slender, wrapped in robes made from fabrics that did not exist on any human world. She had ruled the Valorian Empire for over 300 years, and in all that time, no one had ever defeated her. She watched the human delegation approach with something between boredom and amusement. To her, humans were nothing special. They lived short lives, fought pointless wars among themselves, and had only recently discovered how to travel between stars. They were children playing in a galaxy of ancient powers. Catherine Brooks, the lead diplomat, walked at the front of the group. She was 52 years old, with gray hair and steady hands. She had negotiated dozens of treaties in her career, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Her heart was pounding so hard, she was afraid the Queen could hear it. She stopped at the base of the throne and bowed deeply. The other diplomats did the same. "You may speak," Queen Zyrith said. Her voice was strange, like music and thunder mixed together. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. Catherine straightened and cleared her throat. "Your Majesty, the United Terran Council has sent us to discuss terms of peace. We know that we cannot defeat your empire in war. We know that resistance would only lead to the death of billions. So we come to you with an offer of friendship instead of conflict." The Queen's 4 eyes blinked slowly. "Friendship," she repeated, as if tasting the word. "How amusing. And what could your species possibly offer that would interest me? I could take your worlds whenever I wish. I could enslave your people with a single command. Why should I accept friendship when I can have obedience?" Catherine had prepared for this question. "Because friendship is more valuable than obedience, Your Majesty. Slaves work because they fear punishment. Allies work because they share a common goal. We offer you our loyalty, our resources, and our unique human perspectives. We offer you a partnership that could benefit both our species for generations to come." Queen Zyrith leaned forward slightly. "Pretty words. But I have heard pretty words from 100 species before I crush them beneath my heel. You will need to offer something more concrete if you wish to save your people." Catherine took a deep breath. This was the moment everything depended on. "We offer a union, Your Majesty. A marriage between our species. A bond that would symbolize the peace between Valoria and Earth. A human would join your court as your royal consort, forever linking our fates together." The throne room fell completely silent. Even the Valorian guards, who stood like statues along the walls, seemed surprised by this proposal. A marriage to the queen was an honor that had not been granted to anyone in over 2 centuries. And here were these insignificant humans, offering one of their own as a bride or groom. Queen Zyrith began to laugh. It was not a pleasant sound. It echoed through the chamber like breaking glass, sharp and cold. "You offer me a human spouse?" she said when her laughter finally died down. "A creature who will wither and die before I have finished my morning meal. This is your great offer?" "It is a symbol, Your Majesty," Catherine said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "A symbol of trust and commitment. The human who joins your court would represent all of humanity. Through them, our species would be connected forever." The queen's eyes narrowed. "And who among your kind would be worthy of such an honor? Your presidents? Your generals? Your scientists?" "We have brought candidates for you to consider," Catherine said. She gestured toward the delegation behind her, but before any of them could step forward, a young man walked out from the back of the group. He moved calmly, without hurry, his footsteps barely making a sound on the stone floor. He was 27 years old, with dark hair and gray eyes that seemed to reflect nothing and everything at the same time. He wore simple clothes, carried no weapons, and bore no medals or signs of rank. "I volunteer," he said. His name was Ethan Cole, and until that moment, no one in the delegation had paid much attention to him. He was listed as a cultural advisor, a minor member of the team brought along to help with translation and protocol. He had no military training on record. He had no political connections. He was, by all appearances, completely ordinary. Queen Zyrith studied him with all 4 of her eyes. Something stirred deep in her chest, an old instinct that she had not felt in centuries. It whispered of danger, of hidden threats, of wolves wearing the skin of sheep. But when she looked at this young human standing so calmly before her throne, she saw nothing that justified such feelings. He was just a man, a fragile, short-lived, unremarkable man. She dismissed her instincts as paranoia. After 300 years of rule, she had grown suspicious of everyone. But surely this human posed no threat. What could a single man do against an empire that spanned 17 star systems? "Very well," she said, a cruel smile spreading across her silver face. "I accept your offering. This human will become my consort, and through him, your species will be bound to mine forever." Ethan Cole bowed his head in acceptance. His face showed no fear, no hesitation, no emotion at all. He simply said, "Thank you, Your Majesty. I am honored to serve." The marriage ceremony took place 1 week later. It was broadcast across the entire Valorian Empire and transmitted to every human world. Billions watched as Ethan Cole knelt before Queen Zyrith and swore his loyalty to her throne. Some humans called him a traitor. Others called him a sacrifice. The Valorians called him a pet. None of them knew what he really was. None of them understood what humanity had just done. They had not sent a lamb to the slaughter. They had sent a wolf into the heart of the enemy's den. And by the time Queen Zyrith realized her mistake, it would already be far too late. 3 months passed since the wedding. In that time, Ethan Cole became invisible. He walked 2 steps behind the Queen at every public event. He kept his head bowed during council meetings. He spoke only when spoken to, and even then, his answers were short and humble. The Valorian nobles quickly lost interest in him. He was nothing more than a curiosity, a strange pet that the Queen had acquired from a lesser species. Some of them made jokes about him when they thought he could not hear. They called him the Queen's toy, the human decoration, the symbol of Earth's surrender. Ethan heard every word. He remembered every face, and he smiled politely whenever they looked his way. The royal palace was enormous. with over 2,000 rooms spread across 7 towers. Ethan was given a small chamber connected to the Queen's private quarters. It was comfortable by human standards, with a bed made from Valorian silk and a window that overlooked the capital city. He spent his days exploring the palace, learning its layout, memorizing the patrol schedules of the guards, and mapping every entrance and exit. He asked questions constantly. The palace servants found him charming and harmless. They were happy to explain how things worked, where supplies were kept, and who held power in the court. Ethan listened carefully and thanked them for their kindness. He never wrote anything down, but he forgot nothing. Queen Zareth found herself growing curious about her human husband. She had expected him to be frightened or resentful. She had expected tears or anger or desperate attempts to escape. Instead, she found a man who seemed genuinely interested in her empire. He asked about Valorian history, their customs, their military conquests. He wanted to know how she had risen to power and how she maintained control over so many star systems. At first, she assumed he was trying to flatter her, but his questions were too specific, too intelligent. He actually wanted to understand. One evening, she found him in the palace library. It was a vast room filled with records dating back thousands of years. Ethan was sitting alone, reading through ancient texts about the Valorian civil wars. "You spend much time here," she observed, approaching him quietly. Ethan looked up and smiled. "The history of your people is fascinating, Your Majesty. So much war, so much conquest. You have built something remarkable." "Is that admiration I hear in your voice?" "It is respect," he said carefully. "One does not need to love a thing to respect it. Your empire has survived for millennia. That requires strength, intelligence, and determination. I would be foolish not to study how it was done." Zareth sat down across from him. This was unusual. She rarely sat at the same level as anyone. But something about this human made her want to look at him directly. "You are not what I expected," she admitted. "Most conquered species grovel or weep. They beg for mercy or plot foolish rebellions. But you simply observe. You watch and learn like a student in a classroom." "There is much to learn here," Ethan replied. "Your Majesty has built an empire that spans galaxies. How could I not want to understand it?" She studied him for a long moment. His gray eyes gave nothing away. They were calm, patient, and somehow deeper than she had first realized. There were thoughts behind those eyes, plans that she could not quite see. "You may call me Zareth," she said finally. "We are wed, after all. In private, there is no need for such formality." "Zareth," he repeated slowly, as if tasting the name. Something about the way he said it made her feel unexpectedly exposed. She pushed the feeling aside. He was just a human. What harm could he possibly do? Meanwhile, strange things were happening at the edges of the empire. A supply depot on the moon of Carvos 3 exploded without warning. Investigators found evidence of sabotage, but no suspects. A weapons shipment bound for the frontier fleet disappeared completely, its crew found dead in their bunks with no visible injuries. 3 high-ranking generals died within the same week, each one declared a natural death by medical officers. Their hearts had simply stopped, with no poison detected and no wounds discovered. Admiral Korvax, the Queen's most trusted military commander, was growing worried. He was an old Valorian with scarred silver skin and only one working eye. He had fought in dozens of wars and had survived hundreds of assassination attempts. His instincts had kept him alive when smarter warriors had fallen, and his instincts were screaming that something was very wrong. He requested a private audience with the Queen. She granted it, and he laid out his concerns in the war room, far from any listening ears. "There is a pattern," he said, pointing to a holographic map of the Empire. "These incidents are not random. Someone is targeting our supply lines, our military leadership, our ability to project force. If this continues, we will lose the ability to maintain control over the outer systems within a year." Queen Zyrith frowned. "You believe we have a traitor in our midst?" "Worse than a traitor, my queen. A traitor works for another power. This feels different. This feels like a single enemy, working alone, moving through our empire like a ghost. Someone who knows us intimately. Someone who has access to our most protected facilities. Find him," she commanded. "Use whatever resources you need. I want this threat eliminated." Admiral Korvax bowed his head. "It will be done, my queen." But as he left the war room, he passed the human consort in the hallway. Ethan Cole smiled politely and stepped aside to let the admiral pass. Korvax barely glanced at him. Why would he? The human was nothing. He had no power, no allies, no resources. He could not even leave the palace without an escort. Still, something about that smile bothered the admiral. It was too calm, too knowing, like a man who held a secret so dangerous that he could afford to be patient. That night, another general died in his sleep. His heart simply stopped, just like the others. The medical officers found nothing suspicious. They declared it a natural death and moved on. Ethan Cole spent that evening in the library, reading about Valorian poetry. The Queen joined him for an hour, and they discussed the differences between human and Valorian art. She found the conversation surprisingly enjoyable. He was intelligent, thoughtful, and genuinely curious about her culture. When she finally retired to her chambers, she felt something strange in her chest. It took her a moment to identify the feeling. It was comfort. For the first time in centuries, she had spent an evening with someone who did not want anything from her. Or so she believed. She fell asleep with a rare smile on her silver lips. In the room next door, Ethan Cole sat perfectly still in the darkness. He reviewed the day's intelligence in his mind. The supply routes were mapped. The guard rotations were memorized. The communication codes were decoded. 6 more targets had been identified for elimination. The human resistance cells on occupied worlds were armed and waiting for his signal. Everything was proceeding according to plan. He allowed himself a small smile. The Queen thought she understood him. She thought he was a curious scholar, a harmless pet, a symbol of human weakness. She had no idea that every conversation, every smile, every moment of shared silence was carefully designed to build her trust and lower her guard. He was not her husband. He was her executioner. And when the time came, she would finally understand the terrible mistake she had made. But that time was not yet. There was still work to do, pieces to move, and a war to win. So Ethan closed his eyes and slept peacefully, dreaming of fire and freedom and the fall of empires. The rebellion on Nexus 7 began at exactly midnight, local time. Nexus 7 was a mining colony on the edge of Valorian space. 50,000 humans had been captured during the initial conquest and transported there to work in the underground tunnels. They mined precious metals for the Empire, working 18 hours a day under brutal conditions. Hundreds died every month from exhaustion, accidents, and the cruelty of their Valorian overseers. Hope had been beaten out of them long ago, or so the Valorians believed. The weapons arrived 3 weeks before the uprising. They came hidden in supply crates, disguised as mining equipment. Someone had falsified the shipping documents. Someone had bribed the right officials. Someone had arranged for the crates to pass through every checkpoint without inspection. When midnight struck, the prisoners rose as one. They emerged from their barracks with guns in their hands and fire in their eyes. The Valorian guards were caught completely off guard. They expected broken slaves, not organized soldiers. By the time reinforcements arrived from the orbital station, the colony was already in human hands. The news reached Queen Zyrith within hours. She sat in her war room, staring at the holographic display with cold fury in her 4 red eyes. The colony was a minor loss in terms of resources, but the symbolism was devastating. For the first time in the history of her empire, enslaved humans had successfully overthrown their masters. Admiral Korvax stood beside her, his scarred face grim. "The timing was too precise," he said. The weapons appeared out of nowhere. The guards were neutralized before they could send a distress signal. This was not a spontaneous uprising. This was a military operation. "Then someone planned it," Xyrith replied. "Someone with access to our shipping routes, our security protocols, our communication channels." "Yes, my queen." "Someone from inside the Empire." She slammed her fist against the table. The holographic display flickered. "Find them. I want every suspect interrogated. I want every communication reviewed. I want this traitor brought before me in chains." But even as she spoke, doubt gnawed at her mind. She thought of her human husband, his quiet questions, his endless reading, his calm gray eyes that seemed to see everything. She thought of how he had volunteered so willingly, how he had accepted his fate without fear or hesitation. At the time, she had assumed it was resignation. Now she wondered if it was something else entirely. No, it was impossible. He was just a man. He had no weapons, no allies, no way to communicate with the outside world. He was watched constantly, his movements tracked, his conversations monitored. How could he possibly coordinate a rebellion from inside the palace? She pushed the thought away. She was being paranoid. 300 years of rule had made her suspicious of everyone, even those who posed no threat. That night, she could not sleep. She walked through the palace gardens, trying to clear her mind. The alien flowers glowed softly in the darkness, filling the air with a sweet, unfamiliar scent. She had walked these paths 1,000 times before, but tonight they felt different. Tonight they felt like a trap. She found Ethan sitting by the central fountain. He was alone, staring at the water with a thoughtful expression on his face. He looked up when she approached and smiled warmly. "You cannot sleep either," he observed. "There is much on my mind," she replied, sitting down beside him. "You have heard about Nexer 7? "I have." "It must be troubling for you." "Troubling?" She let out a bitter laugh. "It is an insult, an embarrassment. My enemies will see weakness in this. They will begin to question my power." Ethan nodded slowly. Power is a strange thing. It can be built over centuries and destroyed in a single night. Even the greatest empires must be vigilant against threats from within. Something about his words made her skin crawl. She turned to look at him directly, studying his face in the pale light of the garden lamps. He met her gaze without flinching. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. "I am your husband," he replied. "Your consort. A symbol of peace between our peoples." "No, that is what you pretend to be. But I am beginning to wonder if there is something else behind the mask." Ethan said nothing. His gray eyes remained calm, unreadable. Xyrith stood abruptly, her hand moving to the blade hidden beneath her robes. "The rebellion on Nexer 7, the dead generals, the sabotage to fly lines. They all started after you arrived at my court. Is that a coincidence?" "Many things happened after I arrived," Ethan said evenly. "Your trade agreements with the Korath Federation collapsed. A meteor storm damaged your orbital defense stations. Your chief advisor died of natural causes. Are those my fault as well? Do not play games with me, human." He rose slowly, matching her height for the first time since their wedding. There was something different about him now. The humble servant was gone. In his place stood something harder, sharper, more dangerous. "You asked me who I am," he said softly. "I told you the truth. I volunteered. I chose to come here. I chose to marry you, to live in your palace, to walk among your people. The only question you should be asking is why. Xyrith drew her blade. It was made of Valorian steel, sharp enough to cut through bone with a single stroke. She had killed hundreds of enemies with this weapon. She could kill one more. Tell me the truth, she demanded, or I will cut it out of you. Ethan looked at the blade without fear. Your empire has conquered 17 star systems. You have enslaved billions, destroyed countless civilizations. You believe humans were weak because we die young and fight among ourselves. But you made a mistake, Xyrith. And what mistake was that? He stepped closer until the blade was touching his chest. One push and it would pierce his heart. But he did not move away. He did not even blink. You let one of us inside. The words hung in the air between them. Xyrith's hand trembled slightly. She should kill him now, while she had the chance. Every instinct screamed at her to end this threat before it grew any larger. But something held her back. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the strange respect she had developed for this impossible man. Perhaps it was something else entirely. You are confessing, she said slowly. You are telling me that you are the traitor, the one who has been destroying my empire from within. I am telling you the truth, Ethan replied. Something I suspect you have not heard in a very long time. She lowered the blade slightly. Why? Why reveal yourself now? Because the game has changed. Because in a few hours, everything you have built will begin to fall apart. And because you deserve to know why. He reached out and gently pushed the blade aside. I could have killed you any night since our wedding. You sleep beside me, unguarded. But that was never my mission. Then, what is your mission? To free my people. To break your war machine. To show the galaxy that humanity does not kneel. He paused, and for the first time, she saw something like emotion flicker across his face. But also to give you a choice. A chance to end this with something other than blood. Xyrith stared at him for a long moment. Her mind was racing, processing everything he had said, trying to understand how she had been so completely deceived. She had underestimated him from the beginning. She had seen only what he wanted her to see, and now it was too late. What happens next? She asked quietly. Ethan smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Now we talk about the future. Your future, your empire's future, and the future of every species you have conquered. He gestured toward the palace. Shall we go inside? This conversation will take a while. She followed him without sheathing her blade. She did not trust him. She might never trust him again. But she was beginning to realize something terrible. She had married a weapon. And now she had to decide whether to fight it or join it. They sat across from each other in the Queen's private study. It was a small room, hidden deep within the palace, where Xyrith conducted her most secret business. No servants were allowed inside. No guards stood at the door. It was the one place in the entire empire where she could speak freely. She had brought Ethan here because she wanted answers. But she was beginning to fear what those answers might be. Start from the beginning, she commanded. Tell me everything. Ethan leaned back in his chair, looking more relaxed than any prisoner should. The blade still lay on the table between them, within easy reach. He could have been dead a dozen times over in the last hour. Yet he acted as if he were sitting down for a friendly conversation. 40 years ago, when humans first detected signals from other civilizations, we realized something terrifying, he began. The galaxy was not empty. It was filled with ancient powers, vast empires, species that had been conquering and destroying for millennia. We were children compared to them. Insects beneath their boots. Xyrith nodded slowly. This was common knowledge. Humanity had been late to join the galactic community. By the time they developed faster than light travel, Every other major species had already claimed their territories and established their hierarchies. Our military was primitive, Ethan continued. Our technology was inferior. In a straight fight, we would lose to almost anyone. So our leaders made a decision. If we could not win through strength, we would win through other means. Other means? They created a program called Prometheus, named after a figure from human mythology who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. The program's purpose was simple: to create individuals who could defeat entire civilizations from within. Xyrith felt a chill run down her spine. You are saying that your species deliberately trained people to be spies and assassins. Not just spies and assassins. We were trained to be weapons of mass destruction with a human face. Ethan's voice was calm, almost clinical. I was selected at the age of 6. They saw something in me, some combination of intelligence and emotional control that made me suitable for the program. By the time I was 20, I had mastered 37 languages, 12 forms of combat, advanced chemistry, psychology, infiltration techniques, and the art of manipulation. He held up his hand, showing her the faint scars on his fingertips. My fingerprints were surgically altered. My DNA was modified to pass basic scans as Valorian compatible. My face was reconstructed twice to become forgettable, ordinary, the kind of face that blends into any crowd. Everything about me was designed to make me invisible. Xyrith stared at him as if seeing him for the first time. This was not the humble scholar who had spent months reading in her library. This was something else entirely. Something that had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The generals who died, she said slowly. That was you? Yes. I used a compound that stops the heart instantly and dissolves within hours. It leaves no trace, no evidence, nothing for your doctors to find. The supply depot on Carvos 3? I'd planted the explosives during a tour of the facility. Your security officers were happy to show me around. They thought I was just a curious human trying to understand your technology. The weapons on Nexer 7? I falsified the shipping documents and bribed 3 officials. It cost me nothing. They were all deeply in debt and desperate for money. Your own corruption made my job easy. Xyrith closed her eyes. Every revelation was another wound, another reminder of how completely she had been deceived. She had invited this monster into her home, into her bed, into her confidence. She had told him secrets that she had never shared with anyone. And all along, he had been using her. How many others are there? She asked quietly. How many of your Prometheus agents are scattered across the galaxy? I cannot tell you that. Even I do not know the full extent of the program. We operate independently, without knowledge of each other's identities or missions. That way, if one of us is captured, we cannot betray the others. So humanity has been preparing for this war for decades. We have been preparing to survive, Ethan corrected. Your empire was going to attack us eventually. Everyone knew it. You had conquered every other species in your path. Why would you stop at Earth? He was right, and Xyrith knew it. She had discussed the invasion of human space with her admirals many times. They had estimated it would take less than a year to completely subjugate the human race. It would have been one of the easiest conquests in Valorian history. So you volunteered for this mission, she said. You chose to marry me, to live among us, to destroy us from within. Yes, and everything between us was a lie. The conversations, the shared meals, the evenings in the library. All of it was part of your plan. Ethan paused for a moment. Something flickered across his face, too fast for her to identify. It was a strategy, he admitted. Everything I did was calculated to build your trust and lower your guard. I studied your psychology before I arrived. I knew exactly what kind of companion you would find appealing. Xyrith felt something twist in her chest. It was not quite pain. It was closer to grief. She had lived for 300 years and had never allowed herself to feel vulnerable. But somehow, this human had found a crack in her armor. And now he was twisting the knife. But, Ethan continued, and his voice softened slightly. Somewhere along the way, something changed. She looked up sharply. What do you mean? He met her gaze directly. I was trained to see you as a target, an obstacle to be removed. But I spent months in your presence, listening to you speak, watching you rule, learning who you really are beneath the crown. And I realized something that my handlers never anticipated. What? You are not a monster, Zareth. You are a product of your culture, just as I am a product of mine. You were taught that conquest was strength, that mercy was weakness, that the only way to survive was to destroy anyone who might become a threat. In your position, with your history, I might have done the same things. The Queen said nothing. She did not know how to respond to words like these. No one had ever tried to understand her before. No one had ever suggested that her choices were anything other than pure evil. I still plan to destroy your empire, Ethan said calmly. In 3 hours, your main fleet will be ambushed at the Corvin Nebula. Half of your generals have already been turned or eliminated. The resistance cells on 12 occupied worlds are ready to rise simultaneously. By this time tomorrow, the Valorian Empire will be fractured beyond repair. He leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. But I am offering you something that I was never ordered to offer. A chance to survive. A chance to rebuild. A chance to be something other than a conqueror. Zareth's hand moved toward the blade on the table. She could end this now. One strike and the threat would be eliminated. Her empire might still fall, but at least she would have the satisfaction of killing the man who destroyed it. But she did not pick up the weapon. Why? She whispered. Why offer me anything? I am your enemy. I have enslaved your people. Why would you give me a choice? Ethan smiled, and for the first time, it looked genuine. Because you are not the only one who changed during these months. I came here as a weapon. But even weapons can develop feelings they were not designed to have. He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. His touch was warm, human, alive. Help me build something new, he said. Not an empire of conquest, but a federation of equals. Not slavery, but partnership. Not fear, but respect. You have the power to make this transition peaceful. Without you, there will be civil war. Billions will die. With you, we can save them. The Queen of the Valorian Empire looked at the human who had deceived her, destroyed her, and somehow offered her redemption in the same breath. She should hate him. She should kill him. But she could not bring herself to do either. Instead, she turned her hand over and interlaced her silver fingers with his. Show me, she said quietly. Show me what humanity can build. The battle at the Corvin Nebula lasted 43 minutes. The Valorian fleet had been expecting a routine patrol mission. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by human warships that had been hiding in the asteroid fields for weeks. The ambush was devastating. Within the first 10 minutes, half of the Valorian command ships were crippled or destroyed. Communication lines were jammed. Escape routes were blocked. It should have been a massacre, but something unexpected happened. As the battle raged, half of the Valorian captains refused to fire on the human vessels. They had received a coded message hours earlier, a message that carried the personal seal of Queen Zareth herself. Stand down. Do not engage. A new era is beginning. Not all of them obeyed. Admiral Korvax, commanding the flagship from the center of the formation, ordered his loyal ships to fight to the death. He called the Queen's message a forgery, a trick, a human deception. He would not surrender. He would not bend the knee to these insignificant creatures who, dared to challenge Valorian supremacy. His ship was destroyed 17 minutes into the battle. The human missiles found the weak point in his shields, exactly where Ethan had told him it would be. The old admiral died cursing his enemies, never understanding how completely he had been outmaneuvered. When the fighting ended, 60% of the Valorian fleet had surrendered. The rest were debris floating in the void. The news spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. On occupied worlds, the resistance cells rose as planned. Humans who had been slaves for years suddenly found weapons in their hands and hope in their hearts. The Valorian guards, leaderless and confused, faced an impossible choice: fight and die, or surrender and live. Most chose to live, but the true victory was not won on the battlefield. It was won in the throne room of the Valorian palace, where Queen Xyrith stood before a communication array that would broadcast her words to every corner of her crumbling empire. Ethan stood beside her, silent and watchful. He had written the speech with her, arguing over every word until they found language that honored both species. It was not a surrender. It was not an apology. It was something far more difficult, an admission of truth and a promise of change. Xyrith took a deep breath and began to speak. For centuries, we have built our power on the suffering of others. We called it strength. We called it destiny. We told ourselves that conquest was our right, that other species existed only to serve us. That mercy was a weakness that would lead to our destruction. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly at her sides. She had never shown vulnerability before. She had never admitted doubt or regret. But standing here, at the end of everything she had known, she found that the truth was easier to speak than she had expected. "We were wrong," she continued. "I was wrong. The empire I built was not a monument to Valorian greatness. It was a monument to cruelty, to fear, to the belief that we could only survive by destroying others. But that is not survival. That is slow suicide. An empire built on hatred will eventually drown in the hatred it creates." She paused, looking at Ethan for a moment. He gave her a small nod of encouragement. "Today, I announce the end of the Valorian conquest. All enslaved populations are to be freed immediately. All occupied worlds are to be returned to their original inhabitants. Our military will stand down. Our prisons will open. The chains that we forged will be broken." Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched in stunned silence. Some wept with joy. Some shouted in disbelief. Some simply sat in shock, unable to process what they were hearing. In place of the old empire, a new council will be formed. It will be composed of representatives from every species in our territories, including humans. Together, we will determine our shared future. Not as conquerors and conquered, but as equals. Not as enemies, but as partners. She straightened her spine and lifted her chin. This is not weakness. This is wisdom. This is the recognition that true strength comes not from domination, but from cooperation. The Valorian people have much to offer the galaxy. But so do humans. So do the Korath, the Sarians, the Nexari, and every other species we once oppressed. Together, we can build something greater than any empire. We can build a future worth living in. The broadcast ended. For a long moment, the throne room was silent. Then Ethan spoke. "You did well. I feel like I have destroyed my own legacy," Xyrith replied quietly. "Everything my ancestors built. Everything I spent 300 years protecting. You have not destroyed it. You have transformed it." He moved closer, standing beside her at the window that overlooked the capital city. "Your ancestors built an empire of fear. You will be remembered as the queen who chose a different path. That is a legacy worth having." She turned to look at him. Her 4 red eyes were tired, but there was something new in them. something that might have been hope. And what about us? She asked. This marriage was a lie from the beginning. You came here to destroy me. Everything you said, everything you did, was designed to manipulate me. That is true, Ethan admitted. I cannot undo what I was or what I did. I was trained to be a weapon, and I used every tool at my disposal to complete my mission. Then why should I trust anything you say now? He considered the question carefully before answering. Because I am choosing to stay. My mission is complete. Your empire is falling. I could leave right now, return to Earth as a hero, and never see you again. That is what my handlers expect me to do. But you are still here. I am still here. He reached out and took her hand, just as he had in her private study hours earlier. I cannot promise you an empire, Zyrith. I cannot promise you power or glory or the return of everything you have lost. But I can promise you a partner. Someone who understands what it means to be shaped into something you never chose. Someone who knows that the person you were trained to be is not always the person you want to become. She looked at their intertwined hands. Silver and brown. Alien and human. Conqueror and liberator. Humans are terrifying, she said quietly. Ethan smiled. We prefer the term determined. 3 years passed. The Galactic Council met for its annual summit on the neutral world of the Sara. Representatives from 62 species gathered in a grand hall that had been built specifically for this purpose. It was a symbol of the new era, a place where former enemies could sit together and discuss trade agreements, territorial boundaries, and shared defense protocols. At the center of the council sat 2 figures who had become famous across the known galaxy. Queen Zyrith of the reformed Valorian Republic wore simpler robes than she once had, preferring practicality over intimidation. Her 4 red eyes still commanded respect, but they were softer now, more willing to listen than to condemn. Beside her sat Ambassador Ethan Cole, the human who had ended an empire without firing a shot. Some species still whispered about him in fear. They called him the Ghost, the Deceiver, the man who walked among monsters. But those who knew him best understood the truth. He was simply a man who had done what was necessary to protect his people. The session that day focused on a new proposal for joint scientific research. Valorian technology combined with human creativity, combined with the Sarian mathematics. The project would require cooperation between species that had been killing each other just 3 years earlier. It should have been impossible, but as Ethan watched the delegates debate and negotiate and eventually agree, he realized that the impossible was becoming ordinary. Species that had feared each other for millennia were learning to work together. Former slaves sat as equals beside their former masters. The galaxy was changing, slowly but surely, into something new. After the session ended, Zyrith found him standing on a balcony overlooking the Sarian Ocean. The sunset painted the water in shades of gold and purple. You seem thoughtful, she observed, standing beside him. I was thinking about the beginning, he replied. The day I volunteered to marry you. I was so certain of my purpose then. I knew exactly who I was and what I needed to do. And now? Now I am less certain. But I think that is a good thing. Certainty can be a trap. It blinds you to possibilities you never considered. Zyrith leaned against the railing, her silver shoulder touching his. Do you regret it? Any of it? I regret the lives I took. The generals, the admirals, the soldiers who were only following orders. They did not deserve to die. But I cannot regret the outcome. Billions of people are free because of what we did. That has to count for something. It does. She turned to face him, reaching up to touch his cheek with her cool silver fingers. You know, when you first arrived at my court, I thought you were the weakest being I had ever seen. Fragile, short-lived, utterly unremarkable. And now? Now I know the truth. Humans are not weak. You are simply patient. You wait and watch and learn. And when the moment is right, you strike with devastating precision. It is terrifying and beautiful. Ethan laughed softly. I think that is the nicest thing you have ever said to me. Do not get used to it. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sunset fade into night. Somewhere in the distance, music began to play, a Thessarian celebration of the successful summit. What happens now? Xyrath asked eventually. Now we go home, Ethan replied. We attend council meetings. We negotiate treaties. We slowly build a galaxy where species work together instead of destroying each other.